You might think losing your home to a fire is the worst thing that can happen at 3 in the morning. It is not. The worst thing is standing barefoot on the pavement and hearing your own mother say, "Not our problem." I thought the fire took everything, until the investigator told me my parents were set to inherit $180,000 from my loss. They did not just watch my life burn down, they built the pyre. My name is Naren Clearfield. I am 34 years old. I live in Madison, Wisconsin, a city of lakes and college students and long, freezing winters that teach you how to endure the cold. I have been married to Mark Ridgway for 3 years. We have a life that is aggressively normal. We pay our taxes. We sort our recycling. I work in compliance. I follow rules. I have spent my entire adult life building a fortress of independence so that I would never, ever have to ask my parents for a single dime. I thought I was safe. I thought that if I asked for nothing, they could take nothing from me. I was wrong. I lost my home in a single night. That is the headline. That is the part that gets you sympathy from coworkers and neighbors. But the real story, the one I have not told the police yet, is that I lost my faith in my own bloodline in the same night. You expect a fire to take your furniture. You expect it to take your clothes and your old yearbooks. You do not expect it to burn away the illusion that your parents love you. I remember standing on the sidewalk. It was freezing. The pavement was biting into the soles of my bare feet. I was wearing thin cotton pajamas and shivering so hard my teeth clicked together like dice in a cup. I watched the flames lick up the side of the building, eating through the brick and glass of the place I called home. I held my phone with shaking hands. I dialed the number I had known since I was a child. I needed to hear a voice that anchored me. I needed my father to say he was coming. I needed my mother to tell me to breathe. I called them. It rang 4 times. When my father, Walter, finally picked up, his voice was thick with sleep and irritation. I told him. I screamed it into the receiver. "Dad, the apartment is gone. It is all gone. I have nowhere to go." There was a pause. I waited for the panic. I waited for the concern. Instead, I heard him sigh. It was a long, heavy exhale, the sound of a man inconvenienced by a telemarketer during dinner. Then my mother, Janice, spoke from the background. Her voice was clear. It was not sleepy. It was sharp, like she had been awake for hours waiting for the phone to ring. "Not our problem," she said. The line went dead. I stood there, surrounded by flashing red lights and the roar of water hoses, and I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the Wisconsin wind. That sentence hung in the air. Not our problem. It was final. It was absolute. It was a door slamming in my face. But here's the thing about tragedy. It clarifies things. It wipes the fog off the mirror. In the days that followed, as I sifted through the ashes of my life, I started to look backward. I started to replay the tape of the last week, and I realized that the fire did not start with a spark in the wall. It started with a visit. 5 days before the fire, my mother came to see me. This should have been my first red flag. Janice Clearfield does not visit. She lives in Briar Glen, a suburb that prides itself on manicured lawns and fences that are just high enough to keep secrets in. She hates Madison. She hates the traffic. She hates the noise. She had not stepped foot in my apartment in nearly 2 years, but on a Tuesday afternoon, she called and said she was in the neighborhood. She said she had a craving to see me. I let her in. I made coffee. I played the role of the good daughter. She did not sit down. She paced. She walked through the living room, trailing her fingers along the bookshelves. She went into the kitchen and stood there, staring at the toaster oven. She looked at the smoke detector on the ceiling of the hallway. At the time, I thought she was being critical. That is her default setting. I thought she was judging my housekeeping or mentally calculating how much money I wasted on throw pillows. "You have a lot of stuff, Naren," she said. She was standing by the window, looking at the heavy curtains I had just bought. "Flammable stuff. It is an apartment, Mom," I said. "It is full of things people live with." She hummed. It was a non-committal sound. Then she asked to use the bathroom. She was in there for a long time, too long. When she came out, she looked flushed, excited even. She asked to borrow my phone because hers had died. I unlocked it and handed it to her without a second thought. I went to the kitchen to pour more coffee. When I came back, she handed the phone to me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Thanks," she said. "Just had to check something." She left 10 minutes later. She did not hug me. She just patted my arm and said, "Take care of yourself. Naren, you never know what can happen." I shrugged it off. I told myself she was just being eccentric. I told myself I was lucky she came at all. Then there was Mark. My husband is a good man. Or at least, I need him to be. He works hard. He loves me. But that same week, 2 days after my mother's visit, he came home looking pale. He tossed his keys on the counter and rubbed his face with both hands. "Your mom is weird," he said. "Tell me something I do not know," I replied, not looking up from my laptop. "No, she texted me today," Mark said. "She sent me a message. It just said, 'It is almost time,' and then a second later, she deleted it, or unsent it, whatever you call it." I stopped typing. "It is almost time for what?" "I do not know," Mark said. I texted back and asked her, but she never replied. Maybe she meant a birthday is her birthday coming up. Her birthday is in June. "Mark, it is October." We let it drop. We went back to our routine. We ordered takeout. We watched TV. We slept in the bed that would soon be a pile of charred springs and melted foam. We ignored the warning signs because normal people do not suspect their families of plotting against them. Normal people assume glitches are just glitches. But the biggest piece of the puzzle, the one that turned my sadness into a cold, hard rage, came from the insurance company. I have always been careful with paperwork. I read the fine print. I keep digital copies of everything. I know who the beneficiary is on my renter's insurance policy. It is Mark. It has always been Mark. We set it up when we got married. If something happens to me, he gets the payout to cover our debts. That is how marriage works, or so I thought. After the fire, I logged into the portal to file the claim. I was sitting in a cheap motel room, wearing clothes donated by the Red Cross. I just wanted to get the process started. I wanted to know that we would have enough money to put a deposit down on a new place. I opened the policy document. I scrolled down to the coverage summary. My breath hitched in my throat. Beneficiary Janice Clearfield and Walter Clearfield. Allocation 100%. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflected in my eyes, but my brain refused to process the words. I clicked on the History tab. It showed that a beneficiary change request had been submitted and processed 6 months ago. There was a digital copy of the form attached. I opened it. At the bottom of the page was my signature. Naren Clearfield. It looked like my signature. It had the same sharp slant to the right. It had the same loop on the capital N that I have used since high school. It was a perfect copy, but I knew, with the absolute certainty of a woman who manages compliance for a living, that I had never seen that piece of paper in my life. I had not signed it. I had not authorized it. I sat back in the creaky motel chair. The smell of smoke was still in my hair. I closed my eyes and tried to find a memory, any memory, of signing a form like that. There was nothing. Just a blank space where my consent should have been. They had changed the policy. They had made themselves the sole beneficiaries, and the payout, $180,000. That is not a fortune to billionaires, but to my parents, who have been living above their means in Briar Glen for decades, drowning in credit card debt and keeping up appearances. $180,000 is a lifeline. It is a new car. It is a kitchen renovation. It is freedom. And the only thing standing between them and that money was my apartment, my life, my safety. I realized then why Mom had visited. She was not checking on me. She was checking the asset. She was making sure the apartment was full enough to justify a total loss claim. She was making sure the layout matched whatever story they were planning to tell. And that text to Mark, "It is almost time." It was not a mistake. It was a countdown. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but it was not from sadness. It was from clarity. I am not a vengeful person by nature. I do not hold grudges. I forgive people when they cut me off in traffic. I return extra change to the cashier. But this was different. This was a violation so deep it scraped the bone. They looked at me, their only daughter, and they did not see a person. They saw a payday. They saw a check waiting to be cashed. I looked at the screen one last time. I looked at the names Janice and Walter Clearfield. I did not plan to burn bridges, I whispered to the empty motel room. But they burned my house. They burned everything I own. So I will burn their masks. I closed the laptop. I was done crying. I was done being the victim. If they wanted a drama, I would give them a drama. But it would not be the one they wrote. Let me take you back to the moment everything changed. Let me take you to the night the world ended, so you can understand why I'm going to do what I'm going to do. It was October 3rd. The sound of the alarm was not just a noise, it was a physical assault. At 2:41 in the morning, the world did not wake up gradually. It shattered. The piercing shriek of the smoke detector drove a spike of adrenaline straight into my heart before my eyes even opened. It was a relentless, rhythmic hammer against my eardrums that made thinking impossible. I gasped, inhaling sharply, and that was when the reality hit me harder than the noise. The air was thick. It was not the thin, wispy smoke of a blown-out candle. It was heavy, oily, and tasted like burning tires and melting electrical casing. It coated my tongue with a chemical film instantly. I coughed, a violent spasm that bent me double in the bed, and my eyes watered as they adjusted to the darkness. There was no light, but there was a terrifying pulse. Under the crack of the bedroom door, an orange glow was breathing. It flickered and surged, casting long, dancing shadows across the floor that looked like grasping fingers. I threw the covers off. My body moved on a primitive autopilot. There was no time to look for shoes. There was no time to grab the photo album on the dresser or the laptop with 5 years of work on it. My hand shot out to the nightstand and closed around my phone. It was a reflex of the modern age. We do not grab heirlooms anymore. We grab our connections. I rolled off the bed and hit the floor. The hardwood, usually freezing in October, felt warm. It was a subtle, insidious heat that told me the fire was not just in one room. It was underneath me. It was around me. "Fire," I croaked. But the sound was swallowed by the screaming alarm. I scrambled toward the door, staying low. The air was clearer near the floor, but the heat was rising. I grabbed the handle to the hallway, and it was hot to the touch. Not burning, but hot enough to warn me. I used my sleeve to turn it and threw the door open. The hallway of Riverview Lofts had transformed into a horizontal chimney. Black smoke rolled across the ceiling like an inverted ocean. The emergency lights were trying to cut through it, but they only managed to create hazy, sickly green beams that illuminated the chaos. Down the hall, near the stairwell, the orange glow was blinding. I could hear the fire now. It sounded like a jet engine idling, a low, guttural roar that vibrated in the walls. I ran. I was barefoot. As I sprinted down the corridor, the carpet felt searing against my soles. Every step was a sting of pain, but I could not stop. I could hear doors opening behind me. I could hear a dog barking, a frantic, high-pitched yelp. I fumbled with my phone as I ran, my thumb sliding over the screen. I hit the emergency button. 911, what is your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, a stark contrast to the hell I was running through. Fire, I screamed, my voice raw from the smoke. Riverview Lofts, Unit 7D, it is everywhere. Please. We have units en route. Ma'am, are you out of the building? I am trying, I choked out. I hit the stairwell door with my shoulder. It swung open, and the rush of oxygen fed the flames behind me. I heard a whoosh, a terrifying sound of the fire inhaling, and then the heat spiked. I practically fell down the 3 flights of stairs. My feet slapped against the concrete steps. I was not alone now. Other neighbors were pouring into the stairwell, a chaotic stream of terrified faces, crying children, and people clutching random objects: a pillow, a cat carrier, a jacket. No one spoke. We just ran, driven by the primal need to breathe air that did not taste like poison. We burst out of the side exit and into the night. The shock of the Wisconsin air was like a slap in the face. It was October 3rd, and the temperature had dropped to near freezing. The wind whipped against my thin cotton pajamas, biting into my skin, but I hardly felt it. I stumbled across the asphalt of the parking lot, moving away from the building until my legs gave out. I collapsed onto the hood of a parked sedan, gasping for air, my lungs burning as if I had swallowed hot coals. I looked up. Unit 7D was my home. It was the place where I drank my morning coffee. It was the place where Mark and I had hung our wedding photos. It was the place where I felt safe. Now, it was a torch. Flames were pouring out of the living room window, licking up the side of the brick facade like a hungry animal. The glass shattered as I watched, raining down like sparkling confetti, and a fresh tongue of fire lashed out into the night sky. It was mesmerizing and horrifying. I felt a tearing sensation in my chest, a physical rip, as if the fire was not just burning wood and drywall, but burning the timeline of my life. My past was turning into ash right in front of my eyes. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder, converging on our location. The red and blue lights began to wash over the scene, painting the smoke in strobe light colors. A firefighter in full gear jogged past me, dragging a heavy yellow hose. He stopped for a fraction of a second when he saw me staring at the window. He followed my gaze to Unit 7D. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was muffled by his mask, but it was flat. It was metallic. It was the voice of a man who had seen this 1,000 times. "If that is your unit, that unit is a loss. Do not try to go back in." He did not wait for a response. He kept moving. A loss. The words hung in the freezing air. I looked down at myself. My feet were black with soot. My pajamas smelled of smoke. My hands were shaking so violently that I could barely hold my phone. I swiped the screen to unlock it, but my fingers were clumsy and numb. I failed the passcode twice before I finally got it open. I needed help. I needed someone to tell me that this was fixable. I needed my parents. Mark was not there. I did not know where he was. But in that moment of regression, I did not call my husband. I called the people who had raised me. I called the people who were supposed to be the safety net when the trapeze act of life went wrong. I dialed the home line in Briar Glen. It rang. One ring. I watched the water from the fire hoses arc into the air, hissing as it hit the flames. 2 rings. A neighbor wrapped in a silver emergency blanket was sobbing loudly a few feet away. 3 rings. Why were they not picking up? It was late. Yes. But surely they had a sense that something was wrong. Mothers are supposed to know. Right? 4 rings. Finally, there was a click. Hello? It was my father, Walter. His voice was thick with sleep, groggy and irritated. It was the voice of a man who had been woken up from a pleasant dream and was looking for someone to blame. "Dad," I said. My voice broke. I started to cry, the tears cutting tracks through the soot on my face. "Dad, it is Naren." "Naren." He sounded annoyed. "Do you know what time it is? It is almost 3 in the morning." "Dad, the apartment," I sobbed. "It is gone. It is on fire. I am standing outside. It is all gone." There was silence on the other end. I waited for the gasp. I waited for him to ask if I was hurt. I waited for him to say he was grabbing his keys. "The whole building?" he asked. His tone was not frantic. It was curious, detached. "Yes. No. I do not know. My unit is gone. Dad, I have nothing. I am barefoot. I have nowhere to go." I heard rustling on the other end. Then my mother's voice cut in. She must have been listening on the extension or lying right next to him. "Is she hurt?" Janice asked. Her voice was crisp, alert. "Are you hurt?" Dad asked me. "No, I do not think so. Just smoke. But Dad, I do not have anywhere to sleep. I do not have clothes. Can you come? Can I come home?" I held my breath. I needed them to say yes. I needed to hear that I still had a bedroom in the house in Briar Glen. I needed to be a child again for just one night. My father sighed. It was a long, heavy sound that crackled over the line. Naren, you are 34 years old. You have insurance. You have a husband. You are an adult. But Dad, figure it out, he said. We cannot fix every mess you get yourself into. Walter, give me the phone, my mother said. I felt a surge of hope. Mom would understand. Mom had visited just 5 days ago. Mom had walked through this very apartment. Mom, I whispered. Mom, please. There was a pause. It lasted for 3 seconds, but it felt like 3 years. I could hear her breathing. Naren, she said. Her voice was devoid of warmth. It was the voice of a stranger reading a script. You are married now. You have your own life. Mom, my house burned down, I screamed, causing a woman next to me to look over in alarm. That is unfortunate, she said. But it is not our problem. And then she hung up. The click was soft, but it hit me harder than the heat of the fire. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the screen. Call ended. I stood there, frozen. The wind howled around me, cutting through my clothes. But the cold I felt was internal. It started in my stomach and spread to my fingertips. Around me, the community was coming together. Neighbors were huddled in groups, hugging each other. A woman from the unit across the hall was sharing her blanket with a shivering teenager. A man was handing out bottles of water he had managed to grab from his car. People were crying, yes, but they were leaning on each other. They were connecting. I stood alone. I was physically safe. The fire had not touched my skin, but as I watched the flames consume the last of my living room, I realized I was more destitute than the homeless man who slept near the bus stop on State Street. He had no home because of circumstance. I had no home because my family had looked at my tragedy and decided to close the blinds. They had not just refused to help. They had sounded prepared. They had sounded relieved. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold my shattering pieces together. The flashing red lights of the fire trucks reflected in the puddles on the ground, looking like pools of blood. I lowered my head and let the realization wash over me. I was an orphan. My parents were alive. They were sitting in their warm bed in Briar Glen. But I was an orphan, and as the roof of Riverview Lofts finally collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending a shower of sparks into the black sky, I knew one thing for certain. The fire had taken my past, but that phone call had just incinerated my future. Mark finally arrived 20 minutes after the roof collapsed. He did not come screaming into the parking lot. He did not run toward the police barricade shouting my name. He parked his sedan 2 rows back, turned off the headlights, and walked toward the triage area with a strange, heavy slowness. When I saw him emerge from the smoke and the flashing red lights, he looked like a man walking to his own execution, rather than a husband rushing to save his wife. Naren, he said. He wrapped his arms around me. His embrace was tight, but it felt mechanical. It lacked the frantic, heartbeat-to-heartbeat panic that I expected. He smelled of cold air and stale coffee, not the sweat of fear. I buried my face in his jacket, sobbing into the nylon, trying to wash away the sound of my mother's voice on the phone with his physical presence. I wanted him to be my anchor, but as he held me, I felt a tension in his shoulders that did not feel like worry. It felt like bracing. He pulled back and looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and shifting, darting from my soot-stained face to the burning skeleton of our building and then away to the ground. We need to go, he said. His voice was flat. I got a room at the motel near the highway, the Skylark. I nodded, too exhausted to argue that the Skylark was a place people went to hide affairs or buy drugs, not to recover from trauma. I let him lead me to the car. I sat in the passenger seat, shivering uncontrollably as the heater blasted hot. Dry air into my face. We drove in silence. Mark did not ask what happened. He did not ask how the fire started. He just gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, staring straight ahead at the road as if the yellow lines were the only things holding his sanity together. The motel room was exactly what I expected. It smelled of industrial lemon cleaner masking the scent of decades of cigarettes. The carpet was sticky. The fluorescent light in the bathroom flickered with a maddening buzz. Mark went out to get ice, leaving me sitting on the edge of the stiff mattress, staring at a generic painting of a sailboat bolted to the wall. That was when the inventory began. When you lose everything, your brain tries to quantify the void. It starts making a list, a cruel spreadsheet of grief. I closed my eyes and saw my laptop sitting on the desk in the spare room. It was gone. 5 years of compliance strategies, my unfinished novel drafts, my entire digital life melted into plastic slag. I saw the wedding album. We had paid $3,000 for that photographer because he promised archival quality prints. They were ash now. The photo of my grandmother dancing with me, the only photo where she looked truly happy before the dementia took her, was gone. Then the smaller things hit me, the ones that hurt more than the expensive electronics. The ceramic bowl I made in high school, the ticket stubs from our first date, my grandmother's silver locket that I kept in the velvet box on the dresser. I realized with a sick, hollow feeling that I could not remember the exact curve of the engraving on the locket. The memory was already fading, and the physical anchor was gone. I was trying to put a price on these things, trying to calculate the value of a memory, but the math was impossible. You cannot invoice a feeling. Mark came back with a bucket of ice and 2 sodas from the vending machine. He sat in the chair by the window, not looking at me. "I have to call work," I whispered. It was 4 a.m, but I knew I would not sleep. I waited until 8 a.m. to make the call. I sat by the window, watching the traffic on the highway, feeling like a ghost haunting a cheap motel. When I dialed Stonebridge Compliance Group, I expected sympathy. I expected my boss to tell me to take all the time I needed. Instead, I got human resources. "I am so sorry to hear that." "Naren," the HR representative said. Her voice was professional, polished, and completely empty. "However, per company policy, for bereavement or emergency leave, we need documentation. Can you forward the police report number and the fire marshal's initial assessment by the end of the day?" "I do not have a report number yet," I said, my voice cracking. "I am in a motel. I do not even have shoes." "I understand," she said, in a tone that suggested she did not understand at all. "But without the case number, the system will mark this as unexcused personal time. We have a compliance audit coming up next week. We need everything by the book." I hung up. The coldness of the corporate machine felt like a second rejection. First my parents, now my career. Everyone wanted a piece of paper. No one wanted to know if I was okay. "We can go to my parents' house," Mark said suddenly. He was still sitting in the chair, picking at a loose thread on his jeans. "They have the guest room. It is free." I looked at him. The thought of sleeping in his parents' house in Wisconsin Dells, with his mother hovering over me, asking questions, looking at me with that mix of pity and judgment, made my stomach turn. I had spent my life proving I did not need help. I had built a wall of independence. If I went there, I would be the charity case. I would be the daughter-in-law who lost everything. "No," I said. My voice was sharper than I intended. "I have renter's insurance. We have coverage for temporary housing. I am not going to be a burden. Mark, I have some pride left." Mark looked at me, and for a second, I saw relief wash over his face. It was quick, a flash of muscle relaxing around his jaw. But I saw it. He did not want to go to his parents either. But why? Usually, he ran to them for everything. "Okay," he said. "Then call the insurance. Let us get the money." I nodded. I opened my laptop. No, I did not have a laptop. I grabbed my phone. The screen was cracked in the corner from when I dropped it in the parking lot. I dialed the number for the insurance provider. I had the policy number memorized. It was one of those things I was proud of, my attention to detail. The automated system took 5 minutes. Then, a human picked up. "Claims department. This is David. How can I help you?" I need to file a total loss claim, I said. Fire, Unit 7D, Riverview Lofts. I heard the typing on the other end. Then the typing stopped. Ms. Clearfield, David said. His tone changed. It went from customer service bright to confused. I see the policy here. I see the flag for the fire reported this morning. I can start the process for the personal property and loss of use. Thank you, I said. I need the temporary housing funds immediately. We are at a motel. Right, David said. I am looking at the payout structure, just for security verification. Can you confirm your relationship to Janice and Walter Clearfield? I frowned. The phone felt slippery in my hand. Excuse me. Janice and Walter Clearfield, he repeated. Can you verify your relationship to them? They are my parents, I said. But why are you asking about them? This is my policy. My husband and I are the policy holders. There was a silence on the line. It was not a technical silence. It was the silence of someone reading something on a screen that they did not know how to explain. Ma'am, David said slowly, I cannot process the immediate release of funds over the phone. There is a notation on your account regarding the beneficiary status and authorization levels. What notation? I demanded. I stood up. Mark looked up at me, his eyes wide. I cannot discuss the details without in-person verification, David said. You need to come to our local branch, the one on East Washington Avenue. Can you be there in an hour? We need to verify your identity and review a document with you. A document? What document? Please just come in. Ms. Clearfield, ask for the claims adjuster. Evan Holt. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. My heart was pounding a rhythm against my ribs that felt like a warning drum. What is it? Mark asked. He stood up. Are they not paying? They want me to come in, I said. They asked about my parents. They said there is a document they need to review. Mark went perfectly still. He did not blink. He did not breathe. The air in the motel room seemed to suck out of the window. Did you, Mark started, then cleared his throat. Naren, did you sign anything recently? Like any updates to the policy? I looked at him. No, of course not. Why would I? Are you sure? Mark took a step toward me. His voice was low, almost pleading. Maybe you forgot. Maybe you signed something without looking like a digital form. The question sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Did I sign something, and then, like a camera flash going off in a dark room? The memory hit me. 5 days ago. My mother in my kitchen. The smell of her expensive perfume. The way she had paced around the apartment, touching things, valuing them with her eyes, and then, the moment she asked for my phone. Oh, darn it, she had said, tapping her screen. My battery just died. Naren, sweetie, can I borrow your phone for a second? I need to check an email from your father. I had handed it to her. I had unlocked it with my Face ID and handed it to her. She had walked into the living room. She had turned her back to me. She had stayed there for 5 minutes. I thought she was reading an email. I thought she was playing a game. But the insurance app was on my home screen. It was right there, next to the weather and the news. It did not require a password once the phone was unlocked. It just needed a thumbprint or a face, or, if you were already logged in, it just needed a tap. I looked at Mark. He was watching me with an intensity that terrified me. He was not confused. He looked like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. My mother, I whispered. She borrowed my phone. What? Mark asked. She borrowed my phone on Tuesday. She said her battery died. I looked at my hands. They were trembling. She had my phone for 5 minutes. Mark, alone, unlocked. That does not mean anything, Mark said quickly. Too quickly. She was probably just checking Facebook. The insurance company asked about her, I said, my voice rising. They asked about Janice and Walter Clearfield. And now you are asking if I signed something. Why did you ask that? Mark, why was that your first question? Mark looked away. I want to make sure we get the money. Naren, that is all. He was lying. I did not know what he knew, and I did not know how deep the rot went. But I knew in that moment that the fire was not the only thing burning my life down. There was a script being followed, and everyone seemed to have a copy but me. Get the keys, I said. I grabbed my purse, the only thing I had saved besides my phone. We are going to the insurance office. Naren, maybe we should rest, Mark said. You are in shock. I said get the keys, I screamed. Mark flinched. He grabbed the keys from the dresser. We walked out to the car into the gray, overcast morning. The world looked the same as it did yesterday, but it was not. The buildings were just facades. The people were just masks. And somewhere in a database on East Washington Avenue, there was a document with my name on it that was going to tell me exactly how much my parents thought I was worth. I did not know it yet, but I was about to find out that betrayal has a price tag. And for the Clearfields, the price was exactly $180,000. The office of the insurance provider on East Washington Avenue smelled of stale, burnt coffee and the ozone tang of a high-speed laser printer working too hard. It was a smell I usually associated with Monday morning meetings at Stonebridge Compliance, a scent of boredom and routine. But today, sitting in the stiff visitor chair across from a man named Evan Holt, that smell made bile rise in the back of my throat. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low, headache-inducing frequency. Mark sat next to me. He had not spoken a word since we parked the car. He was staring at the fake potted fern in the corner of the office as if it were the most fascinating botanical specimen on earth. His hands were tucked deep into his jacket pockets, and his knee was bouncing up and down, a nervous tick that vibrated the floorboards and traveled up through the legs of my chair. Evan Holt did not look like a man who delivered good news. He was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with the weary eyes of someone who spent his days calculating the dollar value of other people's misfortunes. He held a manila folder in his hands, tapping it rhythmically against the edge of his desk. Ms. Clearfield, Evan said. His voice was guarded. Mr. Ridgway, thank you for coming in so quickly. We need the housing advance, I said. My voice sounded brittle, like dried leaves stepping on concrete. We are in a motel. I have nothing but the clothes I'm wearing. Evan nodded, but he did not reach for his keyboard to authorize a transfer. Instead, he placed the folder on the desk and slid it across the laminate surface toward me. It moved slowly, heavy with implication, like he was pushing a loaded weapon across the table. Before we can discuss any disbursements, Evan said, we need to address the policy endorsements, specifically, the beneficiary change request that was processed earlier this year. I looked at the folder. I did not want to open it. I knew, with a sick certainty, that whatever was inside was going to hurt more than the fire itself. But I am a compliance officer. I deal in facts. I deal in paper trails. I reached out and flipped the cover open. The document on top was standard. It was a request form, stamped with the company logo, dated 6 months ago. My eyes scanned down past the policy number, past the address, straight to the section labeled Primary Beneficiaries. I stopped breathing. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Beneficiary 1, Janice Clearfield, relationship parent. Allocation 50%. Beneficiary 2, Walter Clearfield, relationship parent. Allocation 50%. Total allocation 100%. Mark was not even listed as a contingent. He was gone. Erased. This is a mistake, I whispered. I looked up at Evan. This is a clerical error. My husband is my beneficiary. He always has been. Evan did not blink. He reached over with a pen and pointed to the bottom of the page. Please look at the authorization section. Ms. Clearfield. I looked down. There, in blue ink, was my name. Naren Clearfield. It was my signature. I stared at it until the lines began to blur. It was perfect. It had the sharp, aggressive slant to the right that I had developed in college. It had the distinct, oversized loop on the capital N. It had the quick, slashing cross on the double T's in the middle of the document text. If you had put 10 signatures in front of me and asked me to pick mine, I would have picked this one. But I knew I had not signed it. My hands started to shake, rattling the paper. I did not sign this. It matches the signature on your original application perfectly, Evan said softly. We verified it at the time of submission. I do not care if it matches, I snapped, the anger finally breaking through the shock. I did not sign it 6 months ago. Why would I remove my husband and give everything to my parents? That was actually my question, Evan said. He leaned back in his chair, watching me carefully. We flagged it as unusual, but since the policyholder you authorized it, we processed it. The change was dated April 12th. April 12th. The date hit me like a physical blow. I turned to Mark. April 12th, I said. Mark, do you remember that week? Mark finally stopped looking at the fern. He turned his head slowly, his face pale and slick with sweat. That was the week the transmission blew on the Corolla, he said. His voice was barely a whisper. Yes, I said. And it was the week we had that massive fight about the credit card debt. The week you told me we were drowning. I looked back at Evan. My parents knew about that fight. I had called my mother in tears, telling her I was terrified we would lose the apartment because of our finances. I had told her I felt unstable. I had told her I felt vulnerable, and she had listened, making soothing noises, gathering the intel she needed to strike. She knew I was distracted. She knew I was desperate. It was the perfect time to slip a piece of paper in front of me, or to forge one while I was looking the other way. How was this submitted? I asked Evan. Was it mailed? Did it come from my email address? Evan shook his head. No, ma'am. That is the other reason I asked you to come in. This form was not mailed. It was submitted in person. In person. At this branch, Evan said. Someone came to the front desk. They presented the completed form. They said you were waiting in the car because you were on a conference call and could not come in, but that it was urgent the changes be made before the billing cycle renewed. And you just accepted that, I demanded. You let someone else hand in a document that changes the payout of my entire life without seeing my face. The policy allows for authorized representatives to drop off paperwork if the signature is already verified, Evan said defensively. Though he looked uncomfortable, the clerk checked the signature against the file. It was a match. They accepted it. Who? I asked. Who dropped it off? A woman, Evan said. The clerk noted it in the log. Middle-aged, well-dressed. Said she was your mother. I closed the folder. I felt cold. Freezing cold. Right down to the marrow of my bones. It was not enough that they wanted the money. They had walked into this office, looked a stranger in the eye, and erased my marriage from the record. They had prepared for my death or the death of my life as I knew it with administrative precision. And the payout, I asked. I needed to hear the number again. I needed to hear the price of my betrayal. Evan hesitated. He glanced at his computer screen. Given the total loss of the property, the loss of use coverage, and the personal property rider, the total claim value is substantial. The check would be issued to the named beneficiaries. How much? I pressed. $180,000. Evan said, $180,000. The room went silent. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the break room down the hall. I could hear Mark's shallow breathing. $180,000. It was the exact amount my father owed on his failed business venture from 3 years ago. It was the exact amount needed to clear their mortgage and fund their retirement in Florida. They had done the math. They had not just guessed. They had calculated the exact value of my destruction to balance their ledger. I want to see the security footage, I said. You have cameras, right? I want to see the woman who dropped this off. We do have cameras, Evan said, but we only retain footage for a certain period, and accessing it requires a formal request from law enforcement or a subpoena. I cannot just show it to you. A crime has been committed. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is fraud. This is forgery. Evan did not stand up. He looked up at me, and for the first time, his expression shifted from bureaucratic indifference to something darker, something like warning. "Ms. Clearfield," he said, "you need to understand something. I am not just showing you this because of the claim. I am showing you this because I had a phone call this morning before you arrived." "From who?" "From a fire investigator named Sloan Mercer," Evan said. The name hung in the air. "She asked for this specific file," Evan continued. "She asked if there had been any recent changes to the beneficiaries. She asked who stood to gain from the fire." I felt the blood drain from my face. "And you told her, 'I am legally obligated to cooperate with an arson investigation,'" Evan said. He closed the folder on his desk, covering my forged signature. "She knows about the change, she knows about the date, and she knows that the beneficiaries are your parents." "I did not do this," I said. "I am the victim here." "In the insurance world, victims do not change their policies 6 months before a total loss event," Evan said. His voice was quiet, almost clinical. "From where she is sitting, and from where the underwriting department is sitting, this does not look like a tragedy. Ms. Clearfield, it looks like a retirement plan." I looked at Mark. He was staring at the floor, his face gray. He knew. He had to know. "You do not sit next to your wife while she discovers her parents sold her out for $180,000 and say nothing unless you are afraid that opening your mouth will incriminate you." "We are leaving," I said to Mark. "Wait," Evan said. "I cannot release the housing funds, not with the investigation pending. The account is frozen." "I do not want your money," I said, though I had no idea how we would pay for the motel tonight. "I want that footage, and I am going to get it." I turned to the door. "Ms. Clearfield," Evan called out just as my hand touched the knob. I stopped. I did not turn around. "You need to get a lawyer," Evan said. "Not a civil lawyer, a criminal one, because right now, on paper, you are not just the woman who lost her apartment. You are being defined as the person who set the stage for it to burn." I walked out of the office. The smell of burnt coffee followed me all the way to the parking lot, but it was nothing compared to the stench of the truth. My parents had not just stolen my money. They had framed me for the crime of their own greed. And as I looked at Mark fumbling with the car keys, dropping them on the asphalt because his hands were shaking so hard, I realized that the circle of betrayal might be wider than just 2 people in Briar Glen. I looked at the sky. It was gray and heavy, threatening snow. "Drive," I said to Mark. "Drive before I start screaming." I met Sloan Mercer at a diner called The Night Owl, located on the edge of town where the streetlights hummed with a dying yellow buzz. It was 10 o'clock at night. Mark was back at the motel, passed out from exhaustion or pretending to be, so I had slipped out with the excuse of needing to buy toothpaste and aspirin. The diner smelled of burnt bacon and stale coffee, a scent that seemed to be the perfume of my new life. Sloan was sitting in a booth in the back corner, far away from the window. She did not look like the police officers I had seen on TV. She was in her 50s, with steel gray hair cut into a sharp bob that looked like it could cut glass. She wore a dark blazer over a turtleneck, and her hands were wrapped around a mug of black tea. She looked like a woman who had seen everything burn and had long ago stopped coughing at the smoke. I slid into the booth opposite her. The vinyl squeaked under my jeans. I felt small. I felt like a suspect. "Ms. Clearfield," she said. Her voice was low, raspy, and devoid of pleasantries. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not offer me a menu. She simply reached into her bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "I appreciate you coming. I prefer to have these conversations away from the official interrogation rooms. The lighting in there gives everyone a headache, and I need you thinking clearly. The insurance agent told me you called him," I said. I tried to keep my voice steady, but my hands were trembling under the table. "He said you asked about my policy." Sloan nodded. She opened the envelope and slid 3 photographs across the table. They were glossy, high-resolution prints of a nightmare. "Look at them," she commanded. I looked, The first photo was of my bedroom, or what used to be my bedroom. The walls were blackened char. The bed was a skeletal frame of twisted metal, but the focus of the picture was the corner where my nightstand used to be. "That is the point of origin," Sloane said, tapping a spot on the photo with a manicured nail. "Right behind the nightstand, low to the ground." "I know," I said. "I thought it was an electrical fire. Maybe the lamp cord." Sloane slid the second photo forward. It was a close-up of the electrical outlet on that wall. The plastic faceplate was melted, yes, but the wires inside exposed by the investigation team looked surprisingly intact. "Copper wires tell stories." "Nurin," Sloane said. "When a fire starts from an electrical short, the copper melts in a very specific way. It beads up. We call it arcing. It looks like little frozen droplets of metal. It is violent and sudden." She pointed to the wires in the photo. "These wires are smooth. They were burned from the outside in. The fire did not come out of the wall. It was placed against the wall." I felt a chill run through me that the diner's heating system could not touch. "Placed. Accidents. Real accidents have a shape," Sloane said. She leaned back, studying my face with eyes that felt like X-rays. "A candle falls over. The burn pattern is erratic. A heater malfunctions. The pattern fans out from the source. But this..." She tapped the first photo again. "This fire burned hot and fast in a concentrated area before it spread. It climbed the curtains and hit the ceiling in under 3 minutes. That is not an accident. That is fuel. That is an accelerant." "You think someone set it?" I whispered. "I do not think," Sloane said. "I know. The lab is still running the chemical sniffer tests. But my nose is better than their machines. It smelled like lighter fluid and timed ignition. Someone placed a device behind that nightstand, set a timer, and walked away." She let that sink in. She let me imagine someone crouching in the dark of my bedroom, planting a seed of destruction while I was at work or while I was sleeping. "Now," Sloane said, shifting gears, "let us talk about access. Riverview Lofts has a secure entry system, key fobs for the lobby, digital codes for the unit doors, no physical keys. That makes my job easier because digital locks leave digital footprints." She pulled a folded sheet of paper from the envelope. It was a spreadsheet, dense with timestamps and user IDs. "Who has the code to your apartment?" "Nurin." "Just me," I said. "And Mark. Anyone else?" "My parents have a code," I said, remembering the visit. "I gave it to my mother 5 days ago when she visited, but it was a temporary guest code. I set it to expire after 24 hours. I am careful with security." "So you say," Sloane murmured. She ran her finger down the spreadsheet. "Here is the log for the week leading up to the fire. We have your entry at 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday. We have Mark's entry at 6 p.m. We have a guest code entry registered to Mom at 4:22 p.m. on that same Tuesday." "That was her," I said. "She came to visit, and she left at 6:58 p.m., Sloane read. "But here is where it gets interesting. The fire alarm was triggered at 2:41 in the morning on October 3rd, but the door to Unit 7D was opened 1 hour and 28 minutes before that." I stared at her. "What, at 1:13 in the morning?" Sloane said, emphasizing the time. "Someone unlocked your front door. They did not kick it in. They did not pick it. They typed in a code." "That is impossible," I said. "I was asleep. Mark was asleep next to me. We did not hear the door." "The bedroom door was closed, correct?" "Yes, we always sleep with it closed." "And you are a heavy sleeper." Yes, I take melatonin sometimes." Sloane nodded, as if this confirmed a theory. 1:13 in the morning, someone enters. They likely plant the device behind the nightstand, maybe set a timer for 90 minutes to give themselves time to get away or establish an alibi. Then they leave. The door locks automatically behind them. "Who?" I asked. "Who entered? Was it the guest code? Did my mother come back?" Sloane looked at me, and for the first time, her expression softened, but it was not a comforting softness. It was the pity you give an animal before you put it down. No, she said. The guest code you gave your mother had expired. This entry was made using a secondary resident code. I frowned. I do not have a secondary resident code. There is just my code and Mark's code. We use the same one. The system logs show that a new user code was created 3 days before the fire, Sloan said. It was created using the master admin privileges. That means it was created by someone who was already inside the apartment or had access to the master app on a paired phone. My mouth went dry. I did not create a new code. I believe you, Sloan said. You are the one who lost everything, but someone did. Someone created a back door into your life so they could walk in at 1:13 in the morning without triggering a forced entry alarm. She leaned forward across the table. Invading my personal space. Naren, you said Mark was asleep next to you. Are you sure? Yes, I said immediately. Of course. He was there when the alarm went off. Was he? Sloan asked. Or was he there when you woke up? Because in the chaos of smoke and adrenaline, memory is a tricky thing. Did you actually touch him before the alarm, or did you just assume he was there because he is always there? I tried to think back to that moment in the dark. The screaming alarm, the smell. I had reached across the bed. His side was empty. But then he had appeared where, had he come from the bathroom, or had he come from the living room? Rushing back in to act the part of the surprised victim, he was there, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. He loves me. Love is a powerful motivator, Sloan said. But so is $180,000, and so is fear. If your parents are the beneficiaries, that connects them to the money. But they live in Briar Glen. They were not the ones who walked through that door at 1:13 in the morning unless they had the code. Who gave them the code? Naren, who had access to the master app to create a new entry key without you knowing. She tapped the photo of the burnt nightstand again. The fire started in the bedroom, she said. The most intimate room in the house. Whoever did this had to be comfortable enough to walk into your sleeping space, kneel down next to where you were dreaming, and plant a bomb. That is not a stranger's crime. That is a crime of intimacy. Are you accusing my husband? I asked. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. I am asking you to look at your life without the filter of sentiment, Sloan said. Your parents changed the policy. Someone created a digital key. Someone walked in while you slept. And your husband is the only other person who lives there. I am not accusing anyone yet. I am following the shape of the fire. And right now, the shape points to the people holding the keys. She slid the photos back into the envelope. She stood up and threw a $10 bill on the table for her tea. Check your husband's phone. Naren, she said, looking down at me. Check his location history for the night of the fire. If he was in bed with you, his phone should have been stationary on the nightstand. If he was elsewhere, the GPS will know. He lost his phone in the fire, I said weakly. He said he dropped it. Sloan let out a short, dry laugh. Of course he did. Convenient. Is it not? How lucky for him that the one device that could track his movements turned to melted plastic. She turned to leave, then paused. I am going to get a subpoena for the cloud data. But that takes time. You are living in a motel room with him right now. You are sleeping next to him tonight. If I were you, I would sleep with one eye open, because if he helped them burn your house, he has already shown he is willing to sacrifice you for a paycheck. She walked out of the diner, the bell on the door chiming cheerfully as she exited into the night. I sat there for a long time. The coffee in the pot behind the counter hissed as it burned on the burner. I stared at the empty space where Sloan had been. I wanted to stand up and scream that she was wrong. Mark was my partner. We had built a life together. He held my hair back when I was sick. He laughed at my terrible jokes. He could not be a part of this. It was monstrous enough that my parents had betrayed me. The idea that Mark was involved, that was a thought too big, too dark to hold. But then I remembered the text. It is almost time. I remembered the way Mark had looked at the insurance office, sweaty, nervous, tapping his foot. I remembered the way he had asked, "Did you sign anything before we even knew about the forgery?" I remembered the empty side of the bed. I stood up. my legs feeling like lead. I walked out of the diner into the biting wind. The walk back to the motel was only 5 blocks, but it felt like 5 miles. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every car that passed looked like it was watching me. When I got back to the motel room, Mark was asleep, or he looked asleep. He was lying on his side, breathing rhythmically. I stood over him in the dim light coming from the parking lot. I looked at his hands, resting on the pillow. Hands that I had held 1,000 times. 1:13 in the morning. Secondary resident code. I crawled into the other bed. The double queen room was all they had left, and pulled the thin, scratchy blanket up to my chin. I shivered. But not from the cold. I was shivering because I was suddenly terrifyingly aware that the monster might not be under the bed. He might be in the bed next to me, and I had nowhere else to go. The next morning, the war moved from the physical world to the digital one, and it arrived with the polite chime of an email notification. It was 8:15 in the morning. The light filtering through the thin motel curtains was gray and oppressive. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, wearing the same jeans I had worn for 2 days, trying to summon the energy to call a rental car agency. Mark was in the shower, the sound of the water hammering against the fiberglass tub acting as a white noise machine that momentarily drowned out my anxiety. My phone buzzed. It was an email from the Human Resources Department at Stonebridge Compliance Group. The subject line was innocuous. Meeting request. Urgent. I opened it, expecting a message about my leave of absence or perhaps a note of condolence regarding the fire. Instead, the text was a cold bucket of corporate ice water. Dear Ms. Clearfield, we have received a credible anonymous report concerning your current state of well-being following the traumatic events of October 3rd. The report suggests that you may be experiencing significant emotional instability that could impact your judgment and decision-making capabilities regarding sensitive compliance data. Per company policy regarding crisis management and personnel reliability, we are placing you on mandatory administrative leave pending a formal fitness for duty evaluation. Please do not access the company server or contact clients until this evaluation is complete. I stared at the screen, my mouth slightly open. An anonymous report. I had not spoken to anyone at work except the benefits coordinator. I had not posted on social media. I had not told a soul that I was feeling anything other than fine. The strategy was so transparent it was almost elegant. If I was labeled unstable or traumatized by my employer, my credibility would be shattered. If I stood up in court and said my parents forged my signature, the defense attorney, my parents' attorney, would pull out this evaluation. They would paint me as the hysterical daughter who cracked under the pressure of a tragic accident and started inventing conspiracy theories to cope. They were not just trying to steal the insurance money, they were trying to delete my voice. The bathroom door opened, and Mark stepped out. A towel wrapped around his waist. Steam billowed out behind him. "Who is emailing this early?" he asked, rubbing his hair with a second towel. "Work," I said, locking the phone screen before he could see it. "Just standard procedure." I could not tell him. If he was the one who had planted the seed, if he was the one who had whispered to my parents that I was losing it, then telling him about the email would only confirm that their plan was working. "I need to call my mom," I said, standing up. "I need to thank her for visiting last week. I feel bad about how I sounded on the phone the night of the fire." Mark paused. He looked at me with a mixture of relief and suspicion. "That is a good idea. Naren, keep the peace. We might need their help if the insurance drags on." "Exactly," I said. I stepped outside the motel room. The air was frigid, carrying the scent of exhaust fumes from the highway. I leaned against the brick wall and dialed the number. My mother picked up on the second ring. "Naren," her voice was cautious. "Hi, Mom," I said. I forced my voice to be soft. I forced a wobble into it, the sound of a daughter seeking comfort. I wanted to call and say I am sorry for yelling the other night. I know you and Dad were sleeping, and I was just so scared." "Oh, sweetheart," she cooed. The change in her tone was instantaneous. It was like watching a viper retract its fangs. "We understand. It was a terrible shock. We were just so worried about you, but we did not know how to help." "I know," I said, "and I wanted to thank you for coming to visit me last week. It meant a lot that you saw the apartment before it happened." "At least you have that memory. It was a lovely apartment," she said. "I am just glad you are safe. That is all that matters. Material things can be replaced." "Yeah," I said. I took a deep breath. Here came the test. The fire investigator. A woman named Sloane Mercer. She thinks it might not be an accident. "Mom, she asked me a lot of questions about who visited. I told her you were there." The silence on the other end was absolute. It was not a pause for breath. It was a freeze response. "Why would you tell her that?" Janice's voice dropped an octave. The sweetness evaporated, replaced by the sharp, metallic edge of the woman who had said, "Not our problem." "Because she asked," I said innocently. "She is looking at the door logs. She asked about the insurance policy too. She seems to think someone changed it recently." "Naren," my mother said. Her voice was now commanding. "Listen to me very carefully. You are confused. You are in shock. You should not be talking to investigators without representation." "Why do I need a lawyer?" "Mom," I asked. "I am the victim. My house burned down. Why would I need protection from the people trying to find out who did it?" "Because you do not know how these things work," she snapped. "They look for someone to blame, and they will twist your words. Do not say another word to that woman. Do not answer her calls. If she approaches you again, you tell her to speak to our family attorney." "Our family attorney?" I asked. "Since when do we have a family attorney?" "We are handling it," she said. "Just stop talking. Naren, you are making it worse." "Making it worse for who?" I asked. She hung up. I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at the black screen. She had not asked if I had clothes. She had not asked if I had eaten. She had only cared about silencing me. It was like she had cut the oxygen line to a diver. She wanted me isolated, quiet, and dependent. I went back inside the room. Mark was dressed now, sitting on the edge of the bed, putting on his socks. "How was she?" he asked. "She told me to get a lawyer," I said. "She told me not to talk to the fire investigator." Mark stopped moving. He held a sock in his hand, staring at the carpet. "Well," he said slowly, "maybe she is right." I felt the blood pound in my ears. "Right, Mark. Someone set fire to our home. Someone forged my signature. Why would I stop helping the investigation?" Mark sighed. He stood up and walked over to me, placing his hands on my shoulders. His grip was heavy. It felt less like a hug and more like a restraint. "Naren, look at you," he said gently. "You are shaking. You are not sleeping. You are seeing conspiracies everywhere. Maybe you are being a little too sensitive about this. Maybe it was just an electrical fire, and the insurance thing is just a clerical error, and you are spinning out." "Spinning out?" I stepped back, shaking his hands off. The investigator showed me the photos. "Mark, the wires did not arc." "Investigators make mistakes," he said. His voice hardened slightly. "I just do not want you to make a scene and lose the payout because you decided to play detective. We need that money. Naren, we are broke." "We are broke," I looked at him. "I thought we were managing." "We are behind," he admitted. "More than I told you." He walked past me to the bathroom to brush his teeth. I stood there, feeling the walls of the small room closing in. My parents were controlling the narrative. My company was questioning my sanity. And now, my husband was gaslighting me, telling me to doubt my own eyes. I needed to see the numbers. I sat down on the bed and opened the banking app on my phone. We had a joint checking account for bills, but we also kept separate personal accounts. It was a remnant of my independence that I had fought to keep. But because Mark was terrible with passwords, he had saved his login information in our shared password manager. I knew it was an invasion of privacy. I knew it was a violation of the trust that marriage is supposed to be built on. But the fire had burned away the luxury of ethics. I logged into his personal account. I scanned the recent transactions, fast food, gas station, auto parts store, and then a deposit. My finger hovered over the screen. Date October 4th. 1 day after the fire. Amount $4,900. Sender D. Kessler. Type external transfer. I stared at the number. $4,900. It was an odd number. If someone owed you money, they usually paid in round figures. 500, 1,000, 5,000. But 4,900 was specific. And in my line of work, I knew exactly why that number was significant. Bank transfers of $5,000 or more often trigger internal review flags for suspicious activity in certain systems. Structuring. Keeping the deposit just under the radar. "Mark," I called out. I tried to keep my voice casual, as if I were just scrolling through Instagram. "Yeah," he spat toothpaste into the sink. "Did you sell something recently? I see a deposit here in your account for $4,900. The water in the bathroom stopped running instantly. Mark appeared in the doorway. He had a toothbrush in his hand. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide. He did not look like a man who had sold a car. He looked like a man who had been caught holding a smoking gun. Yeah," he stammered. "I sold the old transmission and some other parts from the garage to a guy online. For $4,900? I asked. "That is a lot of scrap metal. Mark, and who is D. Kessler?" "Just a guy," Mark said quickly. "A collector. He wanted the parts for a restoration project. You sold them the day after our house burned down," I asked, "while we were sitting in this motel, crying about losing everything. You were coordinating a sale of transmission parts." "I needed cash. Naren," he shouted. The sudden aggression made me flinch. "I was trying to solve our problems while you were busy panicking. Why are you snooping in my account?" "Because I am terrified," I shouted back. "Because nothing makes sense." He glared at me, his chest heaving. Then he turned around and went back into the bathroom, slamming the door so hard the cheap painting on the wall rattled. I sat on the bed, trembling. I was surrounded. To my left was the corporate machine of Stonebridge compliance, ready to label me unfit. To my right were my parents, holding the strings of a $180,000 purse and wielding the weapon of family loyalty. And in front of me, behind that bathroom door, was a husband who received secret payments from strangers the day after our lives were destroyed. Money, reputation, trust, the three pillars of my life were being attacked simultaneously. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to curl up in a ball and accept the narrative that I was the fragile, crazy daughter who should just be grateful that her parents were handling the insurance. They wanted me to sign the papers, take the pills, and shut up. I looked at the bathroom door. I looked at the email from HR. I wiped a tear from my cheek. It was cold, if they wanted a fight. I would not give them a screaming match. Screaming matches can be dismissed as hysteria. I would give them a file. I would give them a dossier. I opened the voice memo app on my phone. I hit record. "My name is Naren Clearfield," I whispered into the microphone, keeping my voice low so Mark could not hear me over the fan in the bathroom. "Today is October 6th. I am being framed for arson and insurance fraud by my parents, Janice and Walter Clearfield. I believe my husband, Mark Ridgway, is being coerced or bribed to assist them. I have just discovered an unexplained deposit of $4,900 in his account from a Dion Kessler." I paused, watching the red waveform dance on the screen. It was the only truth I had left. "I am going to find out who Dion Kessler is," I whispered. "And I am going to find out who unlocked my door at 1:13 in the morning. I am done crying. Now, I am collecting evidence." I stopped the recording and uploaded it to a secure cloud drive, one that I had created 10 minutes ago. With a password Mark would never guess. The siege had begun. But they forgot that before I was a victim, I was a compliance officer. And nobody is better at finding the rot in a system than the person who wrote the rules. I needed eyes on the hallway. The fire had taken the physical evidence, turning the carpet and the walls into sludge, but I prayed that the digital ghosts were still alive. I met Marisol Vega, the building manager of Riverview Lofts, in a temporary trailer set up on the edge of the police cordon. Marisol looked exhausted. Her curly hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was fielding calls on 2 different phones. When she saw me, her expression softened from professional stress to genuine pity. "Naren," she said, waving me into a plastic chair. "I am so sorry. I heard about the insurance trouble. People are talking. I need a favor." "Marisol," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "I need the hallway security footage from last Tuesday, the day my mother visited." Marisol frowned. "The police already asked for the master drive. They took the server from the basement." "I know," I said. "But you told us last month in the tenant newsletter that you upgraded the system. You said it was cloud-based now." 30-day rolling backup. That was the selling point. Marisol's eyes widened. She tapped her temple. "Right. The cloud. The police have the physical hard drives. But I still have admin access to the remote storage." She turned to her laptop. "If they have not locked me out yet, I can look. What time?" "Tuesday," I said. "Between 4 in the afternoon and 7 in the evening," she typed. The silence in the trailer was heavy, broken only by the hum of a portable heater. Then, she spun the laptop around. "Got it," she said. I leaned in. The video feed was crisp, high-definition black and white, at 4:22 in the afternoon. The elevator doors on the 7th floor opened. My mother stepped out. She looked impeccable, as always, wearing her camel trench coat. But she was not just carrying her purse. Behind her, trailing on smooth wheels, was a small, hard-shell suitcase. It was a carry-on size, dark blue. I watched as she walked to my door, Unit 7D. She punched in the code I had given her. She did not hesitate. She looked like she owned the place. "Fast forward," I said, my throat tight. "To when she leaves." Marisol clicked the mouse. The timestamp jumped. 6:58 in the evening. The door to my unit opened again. My mother stepped out. She adjusted her coat. She checked her watch. She walked back to the elevator. My breath hitched. "Stop!" Marisol paused the video. "Where is the suitcase?" I whispered. "In the freeze frame." My mother's hands were empty. She was clutching her purse, but the blue hard-shell suitcase was gone. She had entered with luggage, and she had left without it. The memory hit me like a physical slap. That afternoon, I had been in the kitchen making coffee. Mom had been wheeling that suitcase toward the hallway closet. "Just some winter coats. Naren," she had said, her voice breezy and casual. "Dad is tearing up the attic for the renovation, and I did not want these to get dusty. Do you mind if I stash them in your closet for a few weeks? Just until we get the drywall up?" I had nodded. I had smiled. I had said, "Of course, Mom. Put them wherever you want." I had felt useful. I had felt like a good daughter helping her parents. I had not checked the bag. I had not asked why winter coats needed a hard-shell suitcase. I had literally held the door open for the arson kit. The suitcase was not full of coats. It was the fuel. It was the container for whatever device was going to turn my life into ash. "Can I get a copy of this?" I asked Marisol. "I will email it to you right now," she said. "Before anyone tells me I cannot." I left the trailer with the video file burning a hole in my digital pocket. My phone buzzed. It was Sloan Mercer. "We have a hit from the lab," Sloan said. Her voice was clipped, efficient. "They sifted the debris behind the nightstand. They found melted polycarbonate and copper prongs. It is a plug-in timer. Naren. The kind you use for Christmas lights or coffee makers. Cheap, analog, and mechanical." "A timer," I asked. "Set it for 6 hours. Plug it into an extension cord. Connect it to a heating element or a rigged igniter, and walk away." Sloan explained. "It is simple. It is low-tech, and it means the person who set it did not need to be there when the fire started. They just needed to plug it in before they left." I hung up. A timer. My mother is not a tech wizard. She does not buy things from Amazon because she is afraid of hackers. If she bought a timer, she bought it in person, and if she bought it for this specific purpose, she would have bought it recently. I needed to know where. I went to the public library 3 blocks from the motel. I logged onto a computer terminal. I did not have my laptop, but I had something better habit. My mother often asked me to fix her computer issues when I visited. To make it easier, I had synced her browser profile to my Google account years ago so I could access her bookmarks. She never knew how to unsync it. I logged into Chrome. I went to the History tab. I searched for hardware. Nothing. I searched for timer. Nothing. Then I checked the synced Gmail account. I searched for receipt. Most of it was junk online shopping for clothes, newsletters. But then, I saw it. An email receipt from a loyalty program. Store Harbor and Pine Supply. Date September 28th. 5 days before the fire. Items heavy-duty extension cord. Analog, 24-hour timer. Acetone 1 gallon. My stomach dropped. Acetone, a solvent. Highly flammable. She had bought the ingredients for my destruction at a hardware store 20 miles from her house. Probably thinking the distance would hide her. But she had used her loyalty card. Greed. She could not resist getting the points, even when planning a felony. Janice Clearfield wanted her 2% back. I knew Harbor and Pine Supply. It was a big warehouse store, and I knew someone who worked security there, a guy named Rick, who used to race cars with Mark back in the day. Mark had introduced us once at a barbecue. I called Rick. I played the grieving victim card. I told him my mother had lost her wallet and thought she might have left it at the store last week. I gave him the date and time from the receipt. I asked if he could check the cameras at the register just to see if she had it in her hand. Rick was hesitant, but he liked Mark. For you guys? Sure. Give me 10 minutes. He sent me a video clip via a disappearing message app. I sat in the library, shielding the screen with my hand. The footage showed the checkout counter at Harbor and Pine. There was my mother. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, which only made her look more suspicious. She was paying cash smart, but she scanned her loyalty card key fob. Not smart. She bought the timer. She bought the acetone. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder, and then my heart stopped. In the background of the shot, standing near the end of the aisle, was a man. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low and a generic gray hoodie. You could not see his face. It was shadowed. But I knew the stance. He was shifting his weight from his left foot to his right, leaning slightly against a display of batteries. He had a peculiar way of holding his hands in his hoodie pocket, thumbs hooked on the fabric edge. And when my mother turned to leave the counter, the man turned too. He did not follow her directly. He waited 3 seconds, then walked after her. He walked with a slight limp on the left side, a remnant of a soccer injury from college. It was Mark. I replayed the 3 seconds of him walking. There was no doubt. The slope of the shoulders, the gait, the way he kept his head down. My husband had been at the hardware store with my mother while she bought the materials to burn our home. He was not just a pawn being coerced into giving up a door code. He was there. He was part of the procurement. He had watched her buy the timer that would sit behind our bed. I felt a scream building in my chest, a primal noise that wanted to shatter the quiet of the library, but I swallowed it. I swallowed it down until it burned like the acetone in that receipt. If I confronted him now, he would lie. He would say it was not him. He would say I was seeing things. He would call the HR department and tell them I was hallucinating. No, I needed him to incriminate himself. I left the library. I walked back to the motel in the cold twilight. When I entered the room, Mark was watching TV, eating a slice of cold pizza. He looked up, trying to gauge my mood. "Where were you?" he asked. "I was with Sloan Mercer." I lied. I kept my face blank. I took off my coat and hung it up slowly. "She has a subpoena, Mark." Mark stopped chewing. "A subpoena for what?" "Cell tower data." I said, "She says she does not need to look at our phones physically. She has ordered a tower dump for the night of the fire and for the days leading up to it. She says she can pinpoint exactly where everyone was, down to the meter. She wants to see if anyone's phone traveled to Briar Glen or to any hardware stores." I watched him. Mark went pale. The slice of pizza lowered to the paper plate. His eyes darted to the left, a classic tell. Why would she look at hardware stores? He asked, his voice higher than usual. I do not know, I said, shrugging. She thinks the arsonist bought supplies. She says the data will be back in 48 hours. If anyone was where they said they were not, they are going to prison. I sat down on the bed and picked up the remote control. Is there anything good on TV? I did not look at him. I could feel his panic radiating off him like heat from a radiator. He was terrified, and for the first time since the fire, I felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. Let him sweat. Let him wonder if the invisible net was tightening, because it was, and I was the one pulling the strings. The time for crying in motel rooms was over. The time for panic was done. I had entered a new phase of existence, one that required the cold, surgical precision of the compliance officer I used to be. I needed a weapon, but not a gun. I needed a shark in a tailored suit. I found her in a glass-walled office in downtown Madison. Rena Calder did not have family photos on her desk. She did not offer me water or sympathy. She was a woman made of sharp angles and sharper words, a lawyer who specialized in insurance fraud and bad faith litigation. She listened to my story without blinking, her pen hovering over a yellow legal pad like a hawk waiting to dive. Here is the reality. Naren, Rena said. Her voice was low and cut through the room like a razor. You know they did it, I know they did it, but the law does not care what we know. The law cares about what we can put on a projector screen in front of a jury. You need evidence that cannot be explained away as a clerical error or a daughter's confusion. You need evidence that is absolute. I have the video of the suitcase, I said. I have the receipt for the timer. Circumstantial, Rena countered. Strong, but circumstantial. Your mother could say the suitcase contained old clothes. She could say the timer was for her garden lights. We need to break the paper trail. We need to prove the forgery. She hired a forensic document examiner the next morning. His name was Arthur, a quiet man who looked at signatures through a microscope as if he were reading the map of a soul. I sat next to him as he projected the beneficiary change request onto a large monitor. It is a good likeness, Arthur admitted, adjusting the focus. To the naked eye, it is you, but forgery is an act of drawing, not writing. When you sign your name, you do it in a fluid motion. Your muscle memory takes over. You do not think about the curve of the E or the cross of the T. You just fly. He pointed to a magnified section of the loop in my last name. The ink line looked jagged, like a microscopic staircase. These are hesitation marks, Arthur said. See the small blots of ink, the tiny tremors. The person who wrote this stopped 3 times in the middle of a single letter. They were looking at a reference model. They were drawing your name, pausing to check their work, and then continuing. A person never hesitates when signing their own name. So it is a forgery, I said, feeling a grim vindication. It is a simulation, Arthur corrected, and it is definitive proof of intent. Rena did not stop there. She subpoenaed the visitor log and the security protocols of the insurance branch where the form was submitted. We could not get the video footage without a court order, which would take weeks, but Rena knew how to work people. She went to the branch herself. She found the clerk who had been working the front desk on April 12th. The clerk, a young woman named Sarah, remembered the interaction clearly. You do not forget a woman like that, Sarah told Rena, and later repeated it in a sworn affidavit. She came in smelling like she had bathed in gardenia perfume. It was overpowering. She was very confident, very pushy. She told me her daughter you were on a conference call in the car and could not come in. She made a joke about how hard you work. She said, my daughter would lose her head if it was not attached, so I handle the paperwork. Rena showed Sarah a photo lineup. It was a standard 6-pack of middle-aged women with similar features. Sarah did not hesitate. She pointed to photo number 3, Janice Clearfield. That is her, Sarah said. That is the woman who handed me the form. We had the forgery. We had the witness. But Rena found something else. Something that turned my stomach even more than the fake signature. I had my tech team run a diagnostic on the email chain, Rena told me 2 days later. Usually, When a beneficiary is changed, the system sends an automatic confirmation email to the policyholder. It is a failsafe. You should have received a notification on April 12th saying your policy details have been updated. I never got it, I said. I check my email every day. You did not get it because you never saw it, Rena said. She spun her laptop around. Look at your email settings. The hidden ones. I looked. Deep in the forwarding and POP/IMAP settings of my personal Gmail account, there was a rule I had never created. Rule. If subject contains insurance or policy or beneficiary, mark as read, archive, forward to Naren, backup, storage@gmail.com. I do not have a backup storage email, I whispered. I know, Rena said. We traced the creation date of that address. It was created on April 9th, 3 days before the policy change. And do you know what IP address was used to access your account and set up this rule? I shook my head, though I already knew the answer. It was done from a mobile device, Rena said. Your mobile device? I closed my eyes. The memory of my mother in my kitchen rushed back. Oh, darn it. My battery just died. Naren, sweetie, can I borrow your phone for a second? She had not just been checking an email. She had been hacking me. In the 5 minutes she stood in my living room, while I poured her coffee, she had created a shadow inbox. She had set up a digital diversion so that when the insurance company sent the warning, it would bypass my eyes and go straight to a folder she controlled. She had blinded me with my own technology. This is not just fraud, Rena said, her voice hard. This is wire fraud. It is identity theft. It's elaborate, planned, and downright malicious. We've got enough to bring them down. Naren, we could take this to the authorities right now. I stared at the evidence, the hesitation marks, the affidavit, the shadow email. It was a towering heap of betrayal. No, a voice said from the doorway. Sloane Mercer stepped inside. She looked worn out, but her eyes gleamed with the exhilaration of the chase. She'd been coordinating with Rena, sharing the fire investigation results while Rena assembled the financial case. Don't move on them yet, Sloane said. She sat, setting her heavy bag on the floor. If we act now, they'll shut down. They'll hire top-tier defense lawyers. They'll sell a version where they were only trying to help you handle your money and it was all a misunderstanding. We need them to corner themselves. We need a confession or something close to it. How do we get that, I asked. They're not going to just admit it. They will if they think they're winning, Sloane said. Criminals like this, narcissists who prey on family. They get arrogant when they think the victim is isolated. They want to control the narrative. Let them make the next move. See how they try to bury you socially before they bury you legally. As if on cue. My phone rang that evening. It was my mother. I stared at the screen. The name Mom flashed innocently, a word that used to mean safety and now meant predator. I looked at Mark, who was sitting on the other bed, nervously chewing his fingernails. He had been quiet since I lied about the tower dump, terrified of his own shadow. I answered on speaker. Hello? Naren, my mother said. Her voice was warm, dripping with that sickly sweet concern that makes your teeth ache. Your father and I have been praying for you. We are so worried about your state of mind. We heard well. We heard some things from your workplace. She knew. Of course she knew. She was probably the one who made the anonymous call to HR. I am fine, Mom, I said, keeping my voice flat. You are not fine, darling, she insisted. You are grieving. You are confused. And we want to help. We are holding a special prayer gathering for you tomorrow night at the Briar Glen Community Chapel. A prayer gathering, I asked. Yes, just the family, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, and Pastor Miller. We want to surround you with love. We want to pray for your healing and clarity. It is a time for us to come together and wash away all this ugliness with the fire investigation. I felt the trap snap shut. It was not a prayer meeting. It was a tribunal. She was gathering the entire extended family, the witnesses of my life, to paint a picture of me as the unstable, broken daughter. She was going to stand in front of the altar and tell everyone that I was having a breakdown, that I was imagining things, that I needed to be managed. If she could discredit me in front of the family, she inoculated herself against the truth. When the arrest finally came, she could tell the cousins, "See, I told you she was sick. She made it all up. It was a social court, and she was the judge. Mark should come too," she added. "He needs support as much as you do." I looked at Mark. He looked terrified. He knew that if he went, he would be forced to pick a side publicly. Sloane's words echoed in my head. Let them make the next move. Let them think they are winning. "Okay," I said. "We will be there." "Oh, good," my mother sighed. 7 o'clock. Wear something nice. "Naren, we will take care of everything." I hung up. "We are not going," Mark said immediately. "Naren, that is crazy. They are going to ambush us." "I know," I said. I stood up and walked to the closet to find the one dress I had bought from a thrift store to replace my burned wardrobe. It was black. Appropriate. "We are going," I told him. "She wants a stage. I will give her a stage. She wants to tell a story in front of the whole family." I turned to him, and for the first time in days, I felt a fire inside me that was hotter than the one that had destroyed my apartment. "She is inviting me to a prayer circle," I said. "But I am not bringing a Bible. Mark, I am bringing the file. I am bringing Rena. I am bringing Sloane. And I am bringing the truth." "You are going to do it there?" Mark asked, his voice shaking. "In front of everyone in the church." "Where better?" I asked. "They used a holy place to hide their sin. I am going to use it to reveal it." I looked at the clock. It was 9 in the morning. I had 34 hours to prepare. "Get your suit, Mark," I said. "We are going to church." The Briar Glen Community Chapel was a structure built of beige brick and aggressive modesty. It smelled of lemon floor wax, old hymnals, and the distinct, dusty scent of forced piety. When I walked through the double doors at 7 o'clock that evening, the air inside felt heavier than the atmosphere of a courtroom. I was wearing black. It was the only dress I owned since the fire, but it felt appropriate. I was walking into a funeral for my family relationships. The setup in the fellowship hall was exactly what I expected. It was not a casual gathering. It was a tribunal. My mother had arranged the folding metal chairs in a large circle. Seated there were my aunts, my uncles, 2 cousins I had not seen since Christmas, and Pastor Miller, a man whose smile was as fixed and synthetic as the plastic flowers on the altar. They all looked up when I entered. Their expressions were identical: pity, concern, and a subtle, underlying judgment. They looked at me like I was a broken doll that had been glued back together poorly. "Naren," my mother said. She stood up from the center of the circle. Janice Clearfield was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She was dressed in a soft gray cardigan that made her look smaller, frailer. Her eyes were red-rimmed, likely from irritant drops rather than tears. She rushed toward me, her arms open, but I stiffened. I did not hug her back. I stood like a statue in the center of the room, letting her embrace slide off my rigid shoulders. "We are so glad you came," she whispered, loud enough for the audience to hear. "We have been so worried." She led me to a chair. It was positioned in the middle of the circle, like the seat for the accused. I sat down. I placed my purse on my lap. Inside that purse was my phone, recording every word. My father, Walter, cleared his throat. He was sitting next to the pastor, his posture stiff and authoritative. He did not look like a man who had just forged a document. He looked like a patriarch who was disappointed in his unruly child. "Naren," my father began. His voice was deep, resonating off the cinder-block walls. "We gathered everyone here tonight because we love you. We know what you have been through. Losing your home is a tragedy that no one should endure. But what is happening now, this investigation? These accusations, it is hurting the family." "Hurting the family?" I asked. My voice was calm, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "You are not thinking clearly." my father continued. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You are listening to people who do not care about you. Insurance adjusters, investigators. These people get paid to deny claims. Naren, they get paid to make you suspicious of the people who love you. You need to rest. You need to stop this nonsense about arson and lawyers. You are making a spectacle of yourself, and quite frankly, you are making us look bad. We just want you to heal, my mother added. She reached out and patted my knee. Her hand felt cold. You have been under so much stress with your job, and now this. We think you might be having a breakdown. Sweetheart, it is nothing to be ashamed of. But you are imagining enemies where there are none. I looked around the circle. My Aunt Carol was nodding sympathetically. My cousin David was staring at the floor. They had already been briefed. They had already been told the story Naren is crazy. Naren cracked. We need to save her from herself. Is that what you told them? I asked, looking directly at my mother. That I am having a breakdown. We told them the truth, my mother said softly. That you are fragile right now. That you are lashing out because you are in pain. You are even making poor Mark's life a misery. The poor boy is terrified to speak to us because you have forbidden it. He is caught in the middle of your delusions. Mark is not here, I noted. He is coming, she said. He called me. He said he needed to talk to us. He sounded desperate. Naren, he is worried about you too. I felt a spike of adrenaline. Mark had called her. Without telling me, I took a deep breath. I remembered Sloane's advice. Do not defend yourself. Attack the narrative. I have a question, I said. The room went quiet. The air conditioning hummed. I am not delusional, I said, keeping my voice steady, and I am not tired. So I want to ask you something. Mom, right here, in front of Pastor Miller, in front of God. My mother's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. Of course, dear, anything. You visited my apartment 5 days before the fire, I said. You told the police you were there for 20 minutes. You told Aunt Carol you just dropped by for coffee. I leaned forward. So why do the timestamp logs show you were inside my apartment for 2 hours and 36 minutes? The silence that followed was heavy. Aunt Carol stopped nodding. My father shifted in his seat. My mother laughed, a nervous, tinkling sound. Do not be silly. I lost track of time. We were chatting. We did not chat for 2 hours. Mom, I said. I was working. You were in the other room. And that brings me to my second question. I stood up. I saw the fear flicker in her eyes now. She knew I had something. When you walked into the building at 4:22 in the afternoon, you were pulling a blue, hard-shell carry-on suitcase. I said, I visualized the footage Marisol had given me. But when you left at 6:58 in the evening, you were not carrying anything. You walked out empty-handed. I pointed a finger at her. What was in the suitcase? Mom, and where did you leave it in my apartment? My mother flinched. It was a tiny movement, a microscopic jerk of her head, as if she expected a physical blow. Her eyes darted to my father, then back to me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was coats, my father boomed, standing up to cover her stumble. She brought you winter coats. She left them in the closet. What is this interrogation? It was October 3rd, I said, not backing down. It was 50 degrees outside. I did not need 5 winter coats, and even if I did, why did the fire investigator find traces of a chemical accelerant in the closet where you put that bag? That is a lie, my mother shrieked. The mask of the concerned mother dropped, revealing the snarling face of the woman who had hung up on me. You are lying. You are trying to frame us. The room erupted in murmurs. Pastor Miller looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. At that exact moment, the double doors at the back of the hall swung open. Mark stumbled in. He looked terrible. His skin was the color of old parchment. His shirt was untucked, and his tie was loose. He was breathing hard, as if he had run all the way from the parking lot. Mark, my mother cried out, seeing a lifeline. Mark, tell everyone how sick she has been. Tell them about the pills she takes. I turned to look at my husband. I wanted him to look at me. I wanted him to cross the room, stand by my side, and tell them that we were a team. I wanted him to be the man I married, but he did not look at me. He looked straight at my mother, and in his eyes, I did not see love. I did not even see conspiracy. I saw terror, pure, unadulterated fear. He looked like a dog that had been kicked so many times it learned to wince before the foot even moved. Mark stammered. He wiped sweat from his forehead. We need to stop this. Naren, please, just stop. Stop what? Mark, I asked. Stop telling the truth. Just stop fighting them, he yelled. His voice cracked. You do not know what you are doing. You are going to ruin everything. My phone buzzed in my purse, a long, insistent vibration. I glanced down. It was a text from Sloan Mercer. Sloan, I have the warrant. Judge signed it 10 minutes ago. But we have a problem. My contact at the precinct says your father made a call to a salvage yard an hour ago. They are moving something tonight. We think they are planning a second fire, a cleanup job. A second fire. My blood ran cold. They were not just trying to discredit me. They were trying to destroy whatever evidence they had missed the first time. My phone buzzed again. I expected another text from Sloan, but the number on the screen was unknown. It was a local area code, but not one I had saved. I opened the message. Unknown. If you want your husband safe, keep your mouth shut. We are watching. I froze. I looked up at Mark. He was still staring at my parents, his hands trembling by his sides. Suddenly, the $4,900 transfer made sense. The weird behavior, the way he had handed over the door code. He was not just a traitor, he was a hostage. The debt he owed the debt to D.A. Kessler was not just for car parts. It was leverage. My parents, or someone they had hired, had something on him, something big enough to make him burn down his own home, something dangerous enough to make him stand in a church and lie to save his own skin. Mark, I whispered. He finally looked at me. His eyes were pleading. Please, his expression screamed. Please just give them what they want. I realized then that I was alone in that room. The family was against me. My husband was compromised, and my parents were not just greedy, they were dangerous. They were cornered animals, and cornered animals bite. I need air, I said. I did not wait for permission. I turned and walked toward the exit. Naren, sit down, my father commanded. Do not let her leave. Mark, my mother shouted. Mark took a step toward me, but he stopped. He could not do it. He let me pass. I pushed through the heavy doors and stepped out into the night. The air was biting cold, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the chapel. My hands were shaking so hard, I almost dropped my phone. I needed to call Sloan. I needed to tell her about the text. I needed to tell her that Mark was being blackmailed. I walked toward the edge of the parking lot to get a better signal. The lot was mostly empty, save for the cars of my relatives. My father's SUV, a black Ford Explorer, was parked near the back, under a flickering sodium light. As I walked past it, I noticed something. The trunk was not fully latched. It was popped open just an inch, hovering above the lock mechanism. I should have kept walking. I should have called the police from the safety of the main road. But the instinct that had kept me alive during the fire, the instinct to look for the source of the heat, took over. I stepped closer to the SUV. I reached out and lifted the trunk lid. It swung open silently. Inside, sitting on top of a pile of old blankets, was a black plastic storage bin. The lid of the bin was askew. I looked inside. My heart stopped. Nestled in the bin, next to a red gas can that smelled faintly of fumes, was a small white box. It was packaging. The cardboard was crisp and new. On the front was a picture of a mechanical device with a dial. 24-hour plug-in timer. It was identical to the one in the receipt. It was the twin of the device that had burned my apartment. And next to it was a receipt from Harbor and Pine Supply, dated today. They were not done. Sloan was right. They were planning something else. Maybe they were going to burn the car to hide the evidence. Maybe they were going to burn the motel where Mark and I were sleeping. I heard the chapel doors bang open behind me. Footsteps crunched on the gravel, fast and heavy. "Naren!" My father's voice roared across the parking lot. I stared at the timer in the trunk. The evidence was right here, but so were they. I grabbed the phone. I hit the call button for Sloan. "Pick up," I whispered to the dialing tone. "Pick up, pick up, pick up." The footsteps got closer. I turned around. My father was running toward me, his face twisted in a snarl that looked demonic under the yellow streetlights. And behind him, limping but moving fast, was Mark. I had found the truth, but now I had to survive it. I did not run. Running is what victims do. Running is what guilty people do, instead. I turned around and walked back toward the double doors of the chapel. My father stopped in his tracks. Confused by my sudden change in direction, he expected a chase, but I was done playing the rabbit. I was about to become the hunter. I pushed the doors open with both hands. The heavy wood slammed against the stoppers, creating a boom that echoed through the fellowship hall like a gavel strike. The murmuring circle of relatives fell silent. My mother stood up, her face a mask of feigned worry that was rapidly cracking at the edges. "Naren," she asked, "where are you going?" I walked to the center of the circle. I did not scream. I did not cry. My heart was beating a slow, cold rhythm against my ribs. I felt strangely detached, as if I were watching myself from the ceiling. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I saw the AV cable connected to the projector the pastor had used earlier for hymn lyrics. I plugged it into my device. "You wanted a gathering," I said. My voice was level. It sounded like I was reading a deposition. "You wanted to share the truth with the family. So let us share it. Do you want the truth? Or do you want a story that is easy to swallow?" "Naren, stop this," my father shouted, bursting through the doors behind me. "Do not let her show anything." But it was too late. The screen behind the altar flickered to life. I played the footage from the hallway. The room watched in stunned silence as Janice Clearfield, the woman who had just been leading them in prayer, walked into my apartment building at 4:22 in the afternoon dragging a blue, hard-shell suitcase. The timestamp ticked by. Then, the video cut to 6:58 in the evening. Janice walked out. Her hands were empty. The suitcase was gone. "She went in with a bag," I said, pointing at the screen. "She came out without it, and 2 days later, the fire started exactly where she left it." "It was Coates," my mother shrieked. "I told you it was Coates." "Then why did you lie about the time?" I asked. I swiped the screen to the digital lock logs. "You told everyone you were there for 20 minutes. The system says you were there for 2 hours and 36 minutes. What were you doing for 2 hours?" "Mom." Rigging the timer. The air in the room seemed to vanish. My aunts looked at my mother, their eyes wide with a dawning horror. "This is manipulated," my mother yelled. She looked around wildly. "She is good with computers. She faked it." "She did not fake the signature." A sharp voice cut through the chaos. Rena Calder walked in from the side entrance. She was flanked by a man in a suit I did not recognize. Rena held up a large, mounted poster board. It was the forensic analysis of the insurance form. "This is a beneficiary change request submitted 6 months ago," Rena announced to the room. "It transfers 100% of the payout to Janice and Walter Clearfield. The signature at the bottom has been verified by 3 independent forensic experts as a simulation, a forgery." She pointed to the man next to her. "And this is Mr. Evan Holt, from the insurance provider. He is here to confirm that the woman who submitted this form was not Naren Clearfield." Evan looked uncomfortable, but he nodded. "The woman who dropped it off matches the description of Ms. Janice Clearfield. She claimed to be the policyholder's mother." "You have no proof," my father roared. He lunged toward Rena, his face purple with rage. "Actually, we have the box," Sloan Mercer said. The back doors opened again. Sloan walked in, followed by 2 uniformed police officers. She was wearing blue latex gloves. In her hands, she held a clear evidence bag. Inside was the white cardboard box for the plug-in timer I had just seen in the trunk of my father's car. "We found this in the vehicle registered to Walter Clearfield," Sloane said, her voice projecting to the back of the room. "Along with a gas can and a receipt from Harbor and Pine Supply dated today, it seems you were planning a second accident to cover up the first one. Maybe the car was going to catch fire tonight, or maybe the motel where your daughter is sleeping." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a worldview shattering. My cousin David stood up, knocking his chair over. My Aunt Carol covered her mouth with her hand, backing away from my mother as if she were contagious, but the final blow was yet to land. Sloane pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. She looked directly at Mark, who was standing by the door, looking like a man who wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. "We got the tower dump and the bank records. Mr. Ridgway," Sloane said. Mark flinched. "There was a transfer of $4,900 into your account the day after the fire," Sloane said. "You claimed it was for car parts, but we traced the sender. The account belongs to an LLC called Kessler Recovery. They are a debt collection agency." Sloane turned to the room. "Specifically, they are the agency holding the lien on Walter Clearfield's failed business, and they are the ones holding the note on Mark Ridgway's old garage debt." I looked at Mark. The pieces finally clicked into place. It was not a bribe. It was a squeeze. "They promised to clear it," Mark whispered. He fell to his knees. It was not a theatrical gesture. His legs simply gave out. He knelt on the linoleum floor of the church, his head hanging low. "They told me they just needed the insurance money to retire," Mark sobbed. "They said nobody would get hurt. They said if I gave them the secondary code, they would pay off my debt and leave us alone. I did not know they were going to burn it while we were inside. I swear. Naren, I thought they would do it when we were at work." "You sold us out," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried. "You sold our home. You sold my safety. For $4,900. I was scared," Mark cried. "They said they would ruin me." "You are already ruined," I said. I did not forgive him. Not then. Maybe not ever. I believed his tears. But I believed the evidence more. He was a victim of their manipulation. Yes. But he had made a choice. He had chosen his fear over my life. My mother watched her plan disintegrate. She looked at Mark on the floor. She looked at Rena holding the forgery proof. She looked at the police officers. And then, she broke. "He is lying," she screamed. It was a primal, ugly sound. "The boy is a liar. He set the fire. We had nothing to do with it, Naren. Tell them your mother loves you." She ran toward me, her hands reaching out, her face twisted into a grotesque parody of affection. "Baby, please do not let them take me. I did it for us. I did it so we could be a family again." An officer stepped between us. He grabbed her wrists. "Janice Clearfield, you are under arrest," he said. "No," she shrieked. She thrashed, kicking at the officer's shins. "I am a good Christian woman. This is my church. You cannot touch me here." The click of the handcuffs cut her off. It was a sharp, mechanical sound that signaled the end of her reign. My father tried to slip out the side door during the commotion. He was halfway to the exit when Sloane stepped in his path. She did not look intimidated by his size. She looked bored. "Going somewhere, Walter?" she asked. The second officer moved in, spinning him around and pinning his arms behind his back. Sloane pulled out a small notebook. She looked at my parents, then at the stunned family members, then at me. "Janice and Walter Clearfield," she announced. "You are being charged with first-degree arson, insurance fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit a felony, and tampering with evidence." My mother was still screaming as they dragged her out. She was begging Aunt Carol to help her. She was calling Pastor Miller's name. But nobody moved. The family stood frozen, staring at her not with pity, but with revulsion. That was the real revenge. It was not seeing them in handcuffs. Though that was satisfying, it was seeing the look in my Aunt Carol's eyes. It was the realization that my mother's mask had not just slipped, it had been ripped off. She had used this church, this family, and this prayer circle as a weapon to silence her victim, and now, everyone knew. She would not be remembered as the martyr. She would be remembered as the monster who burned her daughter's house for a payout. The police cars flashed red and blue through the stained glass windows, casting long colored shadows across the pews. I stood alone in the center of the circle. Mark was still weeping on the floor. Rena nodded to me, a silent acknowledgement of a case closed. I walked over to Mark. I looked down at him. "Get a lawyer," I said. "You are going to need one." Then I turned and walked out of the church. The legal battle took 6 months. I got the insurance payout, the full amount, plus damages for the delay. I used it to pay off my own debts, file for a restraining order against my parents, and rent a new apartment in a building with 24-hour security and cameras I controlled personally. I filed for divorce the same week. Mark cooperated with the prosecution in exchange for a lighter sentence, but I could never look at him again without seeing the man who stood in a hardware store and watched my mother buy the tools to kill me. I stood on the balcony of my new apartment one evening, watching the city lights of Madison flicker in the distance. It was cold, but I was not shivering. They had tried to burn me down to build their retirement. They had said the fire was not their problem, but as I took a sip of wine and looked at the new, sturdy lock on my patio door, I realized they were wrong. The fire was the solution. It burned away the lies. It burned away the guilt. It burned away the obligation to people who never loved me, only consumed me. They said the fire was not their problem, I whispered to the night wind, translating the thought into the language of my own heart. But when the investigator arrived, I realized the fire was exactly how the truth found its way in. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a long journey from the ashes of betrayal to the cold light of justice. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you tuning in from the busy streets of New York, the quiet suburbs of London, or somewhere else entirely? Please leave a comment below and let me know. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of justice served cold, please subscribe to the Juliet Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me. Stay safe, and remember always, check your smoke detectors.